In Miami, heat melts anything, even secrets hidden under expensive silk. They thought I was an invisible cog in their real estate machine, someone to step on for champagne. She thought freezing my salary would make me beg. She forgot the golden survival rule of the 21st century. Never corner the person holding the master code to your servers. You think this is office drama? No. This is a digital execution, and I tied the noose. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. Before we begin, I want to share that YouTube has recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon page to listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's story, where you will meet a woman named Josephine Rivera. I am 32 years old, and my official title is Data Architecture Specialist at Verdant Horizon Estates. We are a premier luxury real estate development firm in Miami, specializing in building multi-million-dollar mansions for the ultra-wealthy. From the outside, the company looks like a pristine world of endless ocean views, imported Italian marble, and champagne toasts on private yachts. But that is just the glossy brochure they hand to the billionaires. The reality inside the glass walls is entirely different. My real job is not sitting in those plush, leather-bound boardrooms negotiating lucrative deals. I am the silent janitor of their digital battlefield. I spend my days scrubbing out the stains they leave behind on our corporate servers. I patch the security flaws they create, because half the executives use the word password as their actual password. I recover the shady, hastily deleted contracts they try to bury deep in the system when a zoning deal goes sour. I untangle the chaotic financial data left in the wake of grossly incompetent managers who do not know the difference between a spreadsheet and a basic text document. I am the invisible ghost in the machine, quietly sweeping up the digital trash of Miami's elite so they can keep pretending they are geniuses. Then came Chloe Vanguard. Chloe was 26 years old and recently appointed as our Vice President of Brand Synergy. That is a completely fabricated title that meant absolutely nothing to the bottom line. She did not earn the position through hard work, late nights, or a stellar resume. She got it because her older brother was the company's largest angel investor. For Chloe, the corporate office was not a workplace. It was her personal fashion runway. She paraded down the glass hallways in designer heels, managing her department by shouting out cliché inspirational quotes she copied directly from Instagram influencers. Almost immediately, Chloe cultivated a highly toxic company culture disguised as modern corporate wellness. She started demanding that the marketing and design teams work through the weekends without any extra pay, claiming they needed to show true passion for the brand's vision. She instituted mandatory midday meditation sessions in the main lobby, forcing stressed-out, exhausted employees to sit cross-legged on expensive rugs while urgent deadlines piled up on their desks. All the while, she actively dodged any real, tangible work, preferring to sip iced lattes and browse social media on her phone. Through all of this, I maintained my standard protocol. I stayed completely silent, strictly professional, and entirely invisible. I just sat behind my 3 glowing monitors in the server room, observing everything and committing every single detail to memory. My primary interaction with Chloe consisted of quietly making sure our entire corporate network did not crash because of the malicious malware she accidentally downloaded while shopping for counterfeit designer handbags on shady foreign websites during office hours. I fixed her messes without a single complaint. That is what ghosts do. But every ghost has a boundary you should not cross. The silent conflict between us finally ignited on a Tuesday afternoon. Chloe sent me an urgent email demanding that I wipe a massive data partition on our main server. That specific partition housed archived vendor contracts from the past 7 years. She wanted it deleted simply to make room for thousands of her unedited, 4K resolution vlog videos. She was trying to build her personal influencer brand on company hardware. I replied with a brief, polite email. I told her no. I clearly cited the federal data retention laws that legally required us to keep those financial records intact. I explained that deleting them would result in catastrophic fines for the company. I thought stating the law would be the end of it. I did not realize that by saying no to the untouchable princess of verdant horizon estates, I had just painted a giant target on my own back. The retaliation for my refusal to delete the archives came disguised as a forward-thinking corporate strategy during our all-hands Zoom call later that week. The screen was a massive grid of 60 individual faces, most of them half asleep, covertly checking their phones or pretending to take diligent notes. In the center square of the digital grid was Chloe, broadcasting live from a sunlit corner office that she had recently redecorated with imported succulents and neon inspirational signs. Her brother, the company's primary angel investor, occupied the top left square, looking on with an expression of fond, blind indulgence. Chloe was enthusiastically pitching her latest brilliant idea to the executive board. She wanted a $50,000 discretionary fund to hire a team of 20-something lifestyle influencers. Her grand vision was to have them film viral dance videos and aesthetic montages inside our newly finished, ultra-luxury oceanfront properties before the actual wealthy buyers moved in. The catch was how she planned to finance this vanity project, to keep her own departmental quarterly budget perfectly balanced. She casually proposed reallocating the $50,000 directly from the IT infrastructure and cybersecurity maintenance pool. She spoke about it as if corporate cybersecurity was just a loose suggestion, a pesky line item that stood in the way of true brand synergy. I clicked my mouse and unmuted my microphone. The sudden green highlight around my video square made several executives physically jump and sit up straight in their heavy leather chairs. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of anger or frustration. I simply laid out the cold, hard numbers, with absolute precision. I explained that stripping $50,000 from our cybersecurity budget would immediately compromise our primary server firewall filters and leave our cloud storage entirely vulnerable. I meticulously detailed how our billionaire clients legally mandate strict military-grade encryption for their architectural floor plans, private security layouts, and massive financial escrows. I calmly pointed out to the entire board that a single data breach would not just cost us a few $1,000s, it would directly violate 12 different binding non-disclosure agreements. That kind of exposure would instantly open verdant horizon estates to class action lawsuits reaching into the hundreds of millions of dollars, effectively bankrupting the firm overnight. The silence on the conference call was completely deafening. You could almost hear the sudden drop in blood pressure across the virtual room. I watched Chloe's face drop from her signature glossy, camera-ready smile to a tight, ugly, deeply flushed grimace. She had just been publicly schooled on her own budget proposal by a woman she considered nothing more than the office janitor, right in front of her powerful brother and the entire board of directors. She let out a sharp, forced laugh that sounded exactly like cracking plastic. "Well," she sneered, leaning aggressively into her microphone, her eyes locked on my square. "I guess we know who the corporate killjoy is today. Thanks for the highly technical lecture. Josephine, let us just wrap this up before we all fall asleep from boredom." She abruptly ended the meeting, instantly plunging all 60 of us into silent black screens. The punishment for my public defiance was swift, silent, and incredibly cowardly. On Thursday morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, a generic, automated message from the Human Resources portal pinged into my inbox. The subject line simply read, "Action required regarding payroll status." I opened it to find a sterile, auto-generated notification stating that my direct deposit salary account had been officially suspended, effective immediately. There was no formal disciplinary hearing scheduled. There was no performance review or professional warning. There was only a single, vaguely worded note attached at the very bottom of the screen, stamped with the digital approval from the Vice President of Brand Synergy. The note read, "Suspended to reevaluate alignment with cultural vision." My blood turned to absolute ice, but my hands remained perfectly steady, resting on my keyboard. In the corporate world, arbitrarily freezing someone's pay is the ultimate, unchecked flex of raw power. It is a psychological tactic designed to induce immediate panic, to force you to crawl down the hallway to their office, abandon your dignity, and beg for your livelihood. I did not panic. I stood up, smoothed out my skirt, and walked straight down the long, glass-walled corridor to the Human Resources Department to demand a legitimate explanation. I pushed open the heavy door of the HR director's office. He was a balding, perpetually nervous man who spent most of his long career desperately avoiding any form of conflict. When he saw me standing in his doorway, holding a printout of the suspension notice and demanding a legal reason for my frozen salary, his eyes immediately darted down to the carpet. He stammered incoherently. He nervously shuffled some blank papers on his desk. He absolutely refused to look me in the eye. He fed me a pathetic, rehearsed corporate word salad about temporary administrative holds, executive discretion, and complex internal audits. He was utterly terrified. The truth was glaringly obvious. Everyone in that building was terrified of offending the spoiled sister of the man who controlled the company purse strings. I realized in that suffocating room that there was no system of justice or fair play within these walls. The employee rulebook only applied to the invisible people like me, not the golden children. I nodded slowly, quietly thanked him for his entirely useless time, and walked back to my desk, my mind quietly calculating every possible angle. The absolute peak of her arrogant humiliation campaign arrived the very next afternoon. I was sitting quietly at my workstation, deep in the complex back-end code of our server architecture, when the sharp, rhythmic click of designer heels approached my cubicle. Chloe leaned over my low partition wall, invading my personal space. She smelled intensely of expensive vanilla perfume and unearned confidence. She held out a crumpled, slightly damp Starbucks receipt, letting it flutter down onto my keyboard like a piece of trash. "Hey there," she said, flashing a sickeningly sweet, theatrical smile for the benefit of the nearby desks. "Since you are completely free with no paid projects to work on right now, would you mind fetching the afternoon drinks for the marketing team? Do not worry. This order is entirely on me." She was deliberately treating the lead data architect of a multi-million-dollar firm like an unpaid errand runner. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive dominance. She desperately wanted me to snap. She wanted me to scream, to throw the receipt back in her face, or to storm out, giving her the perfect, documented excuse to terminate me for gross insubordination. Instead, I looked down at the crumpled receipt and then slowly looked up to meet her eyes. I reached out and gently picked up the piece of paper. "Of course, Chloe," I said, making sure my voice was smooth, even, and perfectly pleasant. "I would be happy to handle that for you." Her confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She was visibly confused by my total, immediate compliance. Without another word, she turned and strutted away back to her glass sanctuary. She truly thought she had won. She thought she had successfully broken my spirit and forced me into submission. But as I sat there, tracing the edge of that damp paper, my mind had already shifted gears. I was done being the passive observer. I was done being the silent janitor. As I held that receipt for her overpriced iced lattes, a quiet, absolute certainty settled over me. In my eyes, a digital death sentence for Chloe Vanguard had just been officially signed. I delivered the iced beverages to the marketing department exactly as requested, placing each plastic cup down with careful, deliberate precision. I did not say a word. I simply turned on my heel, walked past the glass offices, and headed straight down into the subterranean level of the building where the climate control dropped by 10 degrees. I stepped into the main server room, a vast, dimly lit sanctuary filled with the relentless, rhythmic humming of towering mainframe racks. I closed the heavy reinforced door behind me and slid the steel deadbolt firmly into place. The lock engaged with a solid, satisfying click that echoed in the cold air. Nobody was getting in. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and woke up my workstation. 3 massive monitors flared to life, illuminating my face in a pale blue glow. I did not open my email. I did not draft a resignation letter. I did not bother looking up labor lawyers. Instead, my fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, bringing up a secure, encrypted command terminal. I typed in a 32-character sequence that I had memorized long ago, hitting the Enter key to launch a hidden executable file. The screen flickered, and a sprawling, complex network map materialized across all 3 displays. This was Project Labyrinth. Nobody at Verdant Horizon Estates knew Project Labyrinth existed. I built it myself during my 2nd year at the firm, working entirely off the clock in the dead of night. Officially, the company used a standard, off-the-shelf, corporate auditing software that essentially just rubber-stamped whatever the executives told it to. It was weak, blind, and easily manipulated. Project Labyrinth was different. It was an invisible, parasitic auditing script that lived deep within the bedrock code of our servers. It bypassed the shiny user interfaces and tapped directly into the raw data streams, silently tracking every single virtual penny that moved through the company's internal networks. It watched the watchers, and right now, I needed it to watch Chloe Vanguard. I initiated a targeted scan, setting the parameters to pull the complete access history for the Vice President of Brand Synergy over the past 72 hours. Lines of green text began cascading rapidly down my center monitor. I was looking for the exact digital footprint she left when she froze my salary. I found it quickly enough. The log showed her generic administrative override commanding the Human Resources portal to suspend my direct deposit. But as I scrolled further down the time-stamped records, I noticed something else. Her digital presence had not logged out after punishing me. Instead, her session identifier kept moving deeper into the financial architecture. My eyes narrowed as I tracked her pathway. She had navigated away from the basic employee management systems and had begun probing around the high-level payroll override portal. This was an incredibly sensitive, restricted gateway used exclusively by the chief financial officer to issue emergency executive bonuses or bypass standard banking holds. What was a marketing executive doing sniffing around the raw financial arteries of the company? I dug deeper into the raw packet data of her session, and that was when the first major anomaly hit me. The system logs showed that her user account had successfully entered the payroll override portal. However, accessing that specific gateway required a mandatory 2-factor authentication process, involving a physical security token and a randomly generated biometric prompt. Chloe did not have that clearance. More importantly, Chloe barely knew how to clear the cache on her web browser without calling the IT help desk in a sheer panic. Yet, the terminal in front of me showed that her account had smoothly glided right past the security firewall. I paused, leaning closer to the screen. I extracted the exact string of code used to breach the gateway. It was a highly sophisticated, elegantly malicious injection script. It was designed to spoof the authentication servers into believing the physical security token was present. Chloe Vanguard did not write this code. She could not even spell the word cryptography. Someone had handed her a skeleton key. I needed to find out how that key was being turned. I abandoned her standard user profile and switched my tactics, utilizing Project Labyrinth to conduct a sweep of the entire Active Directory for unauthorized elevated permissions. For 20 tense minutes, the server room was silent, except for the frantic clicking of my keyboard and the whirring of the cooling fans. Then, the system pinged. A red alert box popped up on my left monitor. I had found a ghost. Buried beneath layers of standard user accounts, hidden behind a masking protocol, was a completely undocumented administrator profile. It had no name, no assigned department, and no employee identification number, but it possessed supreme, unrestricted access to every financial database in the building. I checked the creation date. The profile had been quietly birthed into the system exactly 3 months ago. I quickly ran a reverse lookup on the ghost account, tracing the origin of its login sessions. The server logs provided a specific Internet Protocol address and a corresponding media access control address. It was a hardware fingerprint. I took that fingerprint and cross-referenced it with our internal registry of approved employee devices. The match was instantaneous and undeniable. The ghost account, the sophisticated bypass scripts, and the supreme administrative privileges were all originating from a single piece of hardware on our network. It was Chloe's personal, custom-ordered MacBook Pro, the one encrusted with Swarovski crystals that she brought to every meeting as a fashion statement. My heart began to beat a little faster, not out of fear, but out of the pure, intoxicating thrill of the hunt. I had the weapon, and I had the suspect. Now, I needed the motive. I commanded Project Labyrinth to follow the money. I instructed it to isolate every single transaction authorized by the ghost account over the past 90 days. The data parsed, and a clear, undeniable pattern emerged. The ghost account was not executing massive, multi-million-dollar transfers. It was much smarter than that. It was executing an aggressive campaign of microtransactions. The screen filled with hundreds of authorized payout requests. $9,999, $9,500, $8,750. Every single payment was meticulously calculated to stay just underneath the $10,000 threshold. I knew exactly why. Any corporate transfer of $10,000 or more automatically triggers a mandatory reporting protocol to the federal government for tax and anti-money laundering purposes. By keeping the payments just below that line, the system remained quiet. No alarms rang. No red flags were raised to the internal auditors. It was a classic, systematic bleeding of the payroll funds, executing quietly in the background while everyone else was distracted by mandatory meditation sessions and corporate buzzwords. I looked at the destination of these silent payouts. The money was being funneled into the accounts of 3 different vendors. They were listed in our system as independent interior design consultancies. I opened a new browser window and searched their company names. They had generic, identical-looking landing pages with stock photos of modern furniture and no actual contact information other than a generic submission form. There were no client portfolios, no employee LinkedIn profiles, and no physical office addresses listed. I bypassed the front-facing websites and went straight for the public state business registries. I pulled the federal employer identification numbers for all 3 consultancies. Using those tax codes, I accessed the National Corporate Database to find their official registered addresses. The search engine loaded, processing the cross-country data query. The results popped up, and my breath caught in my throat. The 3 separate interior design firms, collecting tens of thousands of dollars a week from our payroll servers, did not operate out of Miami. They did not operate out of New York or Los Angeles. All 3 distinct tax identification numbers converged on one single, solitary mailing address located halfway across the country. I highlighted the address, copied it, and pasted it into a satellite mapping application. I hit enter and watched as the map zoomed out from the lush coastline of Florida, dragged across the continental United States, and plummeted down into the dry, arid expanse of the Nevada desert. The satellite imagery resolved into a high-resolution aerial view. I stared at the screen, a cold, sharp smile slowly forming on my lips. The registered headquarters for these highly paid luxury design consultants was not a corporate tower. It was not a chic warehouse studio. The coordinates pointed directly to a rusted, standalone post office box sitting on a patch of cracked concrete outside a completely abandoned, decaying gas station on a deserted stretch of highway in rural Nevada. The picture was now crystal clear. Chloe was not just a lazy, entitled vice president. She was a thief. She was actively using a phantom account to embezzle massive amounts of money from her own brother's company, siphoning the funds out through fake vendors to an anonymous Dropbox in the desert. She had frozen my salary not just to punish me, but because the payroll fund was the exact pool of money she was quietly draining, and she needed the extra liquid cash to cover her latest illicit transfer. She thought she was a genius operating in the shadows. She had no idea she had just walked into my labyrinth. The corporate ladder at Verdant Horizon Estates was not built for climbing. It was built as a defensive barricade to protect the people at the very top. A normal, naive employee who stumbled upon this kind of explosive financial discrepancy might have taken the evidence straight to the corporate legal department. I knew much better than to make that fatal mistake. The general counsel and his sprawling team of incredibly expensive lawyers were not hired to protect the company from criminals. They were hired specifically to protect the angel investor and his family from the consequences of their own actions. I remembered how they handled a major zoning violation 2 years ago. They did not fix the problem. They simply destroyed the reputation of the building inspector who reported it, burying him in endless litigation until he resigned. If I handed them this evidence against Chloe, they would not fire her. They would quietly delete the server logs, revoke my administrative access, and then ruin my life with malicious non-disclosure agreements. I could not just light a single match and hope for the best. I needed to build a digital bomb that no one in that building could possibly defuse. I needed to see exactly how she was justifying these massive cash withdrawals to the automated accounting software. Utilizing Project Labyrinth, I breached the vendor management portal and pulled the digital invoices submitted by the 3 fake Nevada companies. Reading through the itemized receipts was like peering into the mind of a deranged, spoiled teenager trying desperately to sound like a seasoned professional. The justifications for the stolen funds were utterly ridiculous. A dark, twisted comedy written in corporate accounting codes. I opened the first PDF document. It featured a poorly designed, fake corporate letterhead. The invoice demanded exactly $15,000 for a service labeled as high-frequency energy balancing crystals for the executive lobby. I clicked on the next document. Another receipt billed the company $25,000 for the consultation fees of a spatial light feng shui specialist. A third invoice requested $12,000 for artisanal aura cleansing following a stressful board meeting. She was legally embezzling enough money to buy a luxury sports car every single month, and she was hiding it behind the absolute worst kind of rich girl spiritual nonsense. It was deeply insulting to my intelligence. She thought the digital auditors were as stupid and superficial as she was. But I still needed the final, damning piece of the puzzle. Who was actually opening that rusted metal box in the Nevada desert? I deployed a highly specialized web crawler that I had originally designed to run deep background checks on sketchy construction contractors. I fed the algorithm the registration documents of the 3 fake design firms. I instructed the software to scan dark web registries, public property metadata, and social media background artifacts for any connected individuals. I traced the digital footprint from the Nevada Limited Liability Company registrations back to a single, unsecured security camera feed at that abandoned gas station. The camera had captured a license plate belonging to a black luxury sedan that visited the drop box every Friday. I ran the plate through a scraped Department of Motor Vehicles database and cross-referenced the registered owner against federal watch lists using facial recognition software. It took nearly 3 hours of heavy computing power before my center monitor flashed with a 99% biometric match. A high-resolution booking photo materialized alongside the Nevada address. The owner of the post office box was not a bohemian interior designer practicing light feng shui. The man staring back at me from the screen had a thick neck, cold, dead eyes, and a criminal record that read like a masterclass in violent organized crime. My software identified him as a high-level enforcer and debt broker for an underground, VIP gambling syndicate operating entirely off the grid in Las Vegas. They were a ruthless organization that catered exclusively to wealthy elites who wanted to place massive, illegal bets far away from the flashing lights and regulatory cameras of the legitimate casinos. The sickening reality of the situation washed over me in a wave of cold clarity. The puzzle pieces locked together with a terrifying, heavy snap. Chloe Vanguard was not stealing company funds to buy more limited edition designer handbags or to fund her lavish vacations in the south of France. She was bleeding. She was drowning in a colossal, illegal gambling debt that she had desperately hidden from her powerful brother and her wealthy family. She had tapped into the company payroll as a frantic lifeline to keep the syndicate enforcers away from her pristine Miami penthouse. And suddenly, my suspended salary made perfect, horrifying sense. She did not just freeze my pay out of pure, arrogant spite because I refused to delete her videos. That was just a convenient excuse. She froze my pay because she literally needed that exact amount of liquid cash to make her weekly extortion payment to the mob. She was using my hard-earned livelihood, the money I needed for my rent and my groceries, to pay for her catastrophic baccarat losses. The quiet anger inside me solidified into something cold, heavy, and absolutely lethal. I did not stop working until the sun began to rise over the Miami coastline. I systematically downloaded every single shred of evidence. I compiled exactly 400 pages of undeniable, hard data. I packed the encrypted folder with the verified Internet Protocol histories, the network hardware fingerprints, the forged energy crystal invoices, and the recovered, decrypted chat logs between her ghost account and the gambling broker. I locked the entire package behind a military-grade cipher and named the master file Sunset of the Empire. This was no longer just a human resources disciplinary issue or a petty office grudge. This was wire fraud, grand larceny, and federal racketeering. Later that afternoon, the office was buzzing with the usual end-of-the-week energy. I was sitting quietly at my desk, pretending to organize some mundane spreadsheets, when the familiar, heavy scent of vanilla perfume wafted into my cubicle space. Chloe Vanguard strolled past my desk, looking utterly radiant and untouchable in a tailored white designer suit. She paused, leaning her hip against the glass partition, looking down at me with an expression of supreme, unbothered pity. She had a fresh designer coffee in her hand, undoubtedly paid for by the money she had stolen from my bank account. "You know," Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial, syrupy sweetness, "next week I will be giving a keynote speech to the entire company about financial transparency and corporate ethics. You really should come and listen. You might actually learn something valuable. Josephine." I looked up from my glowing screen. Meeting her arrogant gaze, I did not flinch. I gave her a small, perfectly polite nod, ensuring my expression remained completely blank and submissive. "I will definitely be there," I replied softly, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I would not miss your presentation for the world." I knew with absolute certainty that fighting Chloe Vanguard through the established internal corporate channels was a guaranteed suicide mission. If I submitted my findings to the executive board, her powerful brother would instantly bury the evidence, fabricate a malicious lawsuit against me, and protect his family's reputation at absolutely all costs. To truly destroy a narcissist who operates under the protective umbrella of extreme wealth, you cannot fight them in the shadows. You have to drag them directly into the blinding, unforgiving spotlight they constantly crave. I decided right then that I was not going to quietly report her crimes to the authorities. I was going to use her own carefully curated, highly publicized stage to execute her. The annual Investor Relations Summit was the undisputed crown jewel of the Verdant Horizon corporate calendar. Every major stakeholder, offshore partner, and influential venture capitalist would be sitting in the main auditorium or tuning into the secure global broadcast. Chloe was officially scheduled to deliver the keynote address on corporate ethics and financial transparency at exactly 10 o'clock on Friday morning. It was an almost poetic setup, handed to me on a silver platter. Late on Tuesday night, while the office was completely empty, I slipped past the primary firewall of the executive presentation servers. I wrote a highly specific, aggressively persistent automated script, known in my field of work as a cron job. This specific piece of code was elegantly designed to lie completely dormant, absolutely undetectable by any standard cybersecurity sweeps, until the precise moment of execution. I tied the activation trigger directly to the digital clicker Chloe would be holding on stage. At exactly 10 o'clock, the very second she pressed the button to advance to her second presentation slide, my cron job would silently seize total administrative control of the massive light-emitting diode screen in the auditorium and the global video feed. It would instantly lock out all local inputs, meaning nobody in the control booth or the information technology department could possibly shut it down or override the feed. But a technical trap is entirely useless if the prey suspects something is wrong. Throughout the rest of the week, I had to play the part of the broken, defeated corporate drone. I needed Chloe to feel so wildly overconfident that she would not bother to double-check her own surroundings. I stopped wearing my usual sharp, professional blazers and intentionally switched to wrinkled, oversized sweaters. I stopped wearing any makeup, allowing the deep, dark circles from my sleepless nights of aggressive data mining to show prominently on my face. I walked through the hallways with my shoulders slumped, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the floor whenever I passed the glass executive offices. Chloe swallowed the performance completely. Every time she saw me shuffling toward the break room for free coffee, her lips would curl into a tight, incredibly smug smile. She truly believed the lack of a paycheck was successfully crushing my spirit and forcing me into quiet, desperate submission. Her profound arrogance made her wonderfully blind to the digital tripwires I was stringing up around her ankles. While I played the pathetic victim in the daylight, I spent the midnight hours ensuring the trap had lethal teeth. A public humiliation might cost Chloe her vice president title, but I wanted to make absolutely sure it cost her everything else. I meticulously scrubbed every single digital footprint I had ever left on the Labyrinth auditing system. I routed my secure connection through 7 different encrypted proxy servers located across 3 continents, effectively turning my anonymous administrative account into an untraceable, digital ghost. Once my identity was completely shielded from any forensic blowback, I accessed a secure, encrypted email client on the dark web. I attached the master file, Sunset of the Empire, and sent it directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. I sent a duplicate, untraceable copy to an independent fraud investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission. There was no going back now. The federal government was officially on the clock. The tension in the office reached its absolute peak on Thursday evening, the night before the massive summit. The perpetually nervous director of human resources called me into his office just as the sun was setting over the Miami skyline. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. Shifting his weight behind his large mahogany desk, he offered me what he clearly thought was a generous, face-saving lifeline. He told me that Chloe was feeling merciful ahead of her big speech. He quietly suggested that if I typed up a formal, company-wide email apologizing for my insubordinate attitude and publicly validating her visionary leadership, my salary would magically be reinstated by the end of the business day. He framed it as a simple, painless surrender. I sat in the heavy leather chair across from him, listening to his pathetic attempt at corporate diplomacy. I did not get angry. I did not raise my voice or argue about the profound, sickening injustice of the situation. Instead, I looked him dead in the eyes and let a slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. It was a smile so cold and detached that it made him visibly recoil in his seat, as if the temperature in the room had suddenly dropped 20 degrees. "That will not be necessary," I said, ensuring my voice was smooth and perfectly even. "Tomorrow, the company will have plenty of budget again." I stood up, walked out of his office, and left the building without looking back. The pieces were all exactly where they needed to be. The king was trapped on the board. It was finally time for the last move. Friday morning arrived with the kind of blinding, flawless sunshine that Miami real estate brochures are built on. The grand auditorium of Verdant Horizon Estates was packed to absolute capacity. Every leather seat was filled with senior executives, major stakeholders, and wealthy international investors who had flown in specifically for the annual summit. The lighting was perfectly calibrated to project an aura of immense wealth and unshakable stability. Chloe Vanguard stepped up to the sleek, clear acrylic podium. She was dressed in an immaculate, custom-tailored white designer suit, looking every inch the visionary leader she pretended to be. Behind her, a massive, state-of-the-art light-emitting diode screen spanned the entire width of the stage, glowing with the company's emerald green logo. Down in the front row, sitting dead center, was her older brother. He had his legs comfortably crossed, leaning back in his chair and beaming up at his sister with an expression of overwhelming, blind pride. She leaned into the microphone, offering the crowd a practiced, glossy smile. She began her keynote address, speaking eloquently about the vital importance of corporate transparency, ethical financial stewardship, and building a culture of uncompromising trust. It was a masterclass in absolute hypocrisy. From my seat in the very last row of the auditorium, shrouded in the dim lighting of the upper tier, I watched the digital clock mounted on the far wall. The red numbers shifted. It was exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. Down on the stage, Chloe delivered her opening punchline and confidently pressed the small plastic button on her wireless presenter remote to transition to her first revenue chart. She did not trigger a slide change. She pulled the digital trigger on my execution code. The cron job I had planted deep inside the presentation server woke up from its dormant state. It bypassed the local control booth in a fraction of a second, locked out every administrative keyboard in the building, and violently seized total control of the visual feed. The glowing emerald logo behind Chloe abruptly vanished. The massive screen plunged into a stark, unforgiving black. An audible gasp rippled through the packed auditorium as the lighting shifted. Then, towering letters in bright, flashing blood red materialized across the entire width of the display. The text read, "Override account, Chloe Vanguard, recipient Nevada Syndicate." Chloe stopped speaking. She turned around, her perfect posture instantly shattering as she stared up at her own name burning in red light. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, the screen split down the middle. A brutal, synchronized data dump began to scroll automatically. On the left side of the towering display, the ridiculous corporate invoices appeared, demanding thousands of dollars for energy balancing crystals and light feng shui. On the right side, perfectly aligned with the exact same dollar amounts and the exact same down to the minute timestamps, were the decrypted, undeniable casino debt markers issued by the underground gambling ring. Beneath every single match transaction, the system boldly displayed the hardware identification and Internet protocol address, confirming without a shadow of a doubt that every single fraudulent transfer had originated directly from the customized laptop currently sitting on Chloe's podium. The silence in the auditorium was absolute and terrifying. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Not a single person moved. Panic completely consumed Chloe. She dropped her microphone. It hit the stage with a loud, piercing shriek of feedback. She scrambled toward the podium, wildly mashing the keys on her laptop, desperately trying to force the system to reboot, to sleep, to do anything to make the glowing evidence disappear. But my lock was absolute. The screen kept scrolling, mercilessly exposing every stolen dollar, every lie, and every desperate payment to the criminal underworld, right to the faces of the people she was stealing from. In the front row, the proud smile on her brother's face had completely melted away. It was replaced first by pale, sickening confusion, and then by a violently dark, explosive rage. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He realized in real time that his beloved sister was not a visionary marketing genius. She was a desperate addict actively embezzling his fortune to pay off a violent mafia syndicate. "Turn it off!" Chloe screamed at the control booth, her voice cracking into a hysterical, high-pitched shriek. "Somebody turn the main power off!" But before the paralyzed technicians could even move toward the breaker box, the heavy acoustic doors at the back of the auditorium swung wide open. It was not the private corporate security team. Two federal agents wearing dark, unbranded suits strode purposely down the center aisle. One of them held up a leather wallet displaying a silver badge, while the other carried a thick manila folder containing an emergency federal search warrant. The anonymous digital package I had routed to the authorities had done its job flawlessly. They had enough probable cause to raid the building, and they were walking right into a room full of witnesses staring at a 50-foot-tall confession. Chloe looked at the federal agents, looked at her furious brother, and then looked back up at the unblinking screen. Her legs simply gave out. She collapsed onto the polished wooden floor of the stage, burying her face in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. The immaculate white designer suit crumpled around her. Her expensive waterproof mascara was no match for the flood of terrified tears streaming down her face. The agents hauled her to her feet and secured her wrists. As they escorted her back up the long center aisle, the entire room watched in stunned, breathless silence. They marched her all the way to the back of the hall. She walked right past the final row of seats. I did not stand up. I did not gloat. I simply sat there with my legs elegantly crossed, holding a paper cup, as the disgraced vice president of brand synergy was marched out of the building in tears. I raised my cup, took a slow, quiet sip of my black coffee, and watched the heavy doors swing shut behind her. Within exactly 3 days, the entire corporate leadership hierarchy was completely purged. The angel investor stepped down in absolute disgrace, desperately trying to shield his personal assets from the incoming federal indictments. The newly installed, highly terrified interim board of directors scrambled to rectify the catastrophic internal failures. My suspended salary was instantly reinstated, accompanied by a massive, unconditional financial compensation package cleverly disguised as a retention bonus to ensure my absolute silence. But they knew they needed someone who actually understood the architecture of the disaster they had just survived. By Friday afternoon, they formally promoted me to the newly created position of Omnipotent Director of Data Control. I was no longer an invisible janitor. I was the absolute warden of their entire digital kingdom. I stood in the cold, quiet server room, slipping my heavy new executive access badge into my pocket. I looked at the 3 glowing monitors in front of me. The malicious ghost accounts were deleted. The financial arteries were clean. The code was running flawlessly, executing billions of commands with perfect, unbreakable logic. I smiled. Everything was neat, clean, and exact, just the way it was always supposed to be. Thank you so very much to all of our incredible listeners for joining us today and letting me share this story with you. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's journey and want to hear even more thrilling, high-stakes office drama, please consider supporting us. You can join the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to listen to the absolute best, most intense, and completely exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. Just scan the quick response code currently on your screen, or click the convenient Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Have a wonderful day, and stay sharp out there.